Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me out here today. We are going to talk a little bit about what we call growing addiction. When we begin a program in a school, such as student drug testing, we always get some of the same type of questions that come up. And one of them is, why do we need to do this? Why do we need to bother this? We don't have a drug problem in our community. That's going to be 2 communities, 3 communities away. We don't have this issue. It's a waste of time and it's a waste of money. So what I want to do today, and I really appreciate the opportunity, is to come out here and help all of you understand what's going on in the world around us. So we have a lot of information to go over, and I hopefully will have an opportunity to answer any questions that anyone may have. But today we're going to talk about what addiction is in today's terms. It may not be what we think that it is. We're also going to talk about proper medication disposal, which is a huge problem, especially for students. They're getting access to medication somehow. And so this is going to be a good point to discuss. Understanding opioids and the opioid epidemic that we're facing. Prevention tips for our youth, and then signs and symptoms of drug use, which I think everyone in this room needs to be familiar with going forward. So let's talk a little bit about what we call the evolution of drug culture. So when we talk about drug culture, what we're talking about is society's view of substance use. You see, we have changed significantly. The problems that are plaguing our society today are some things that we have never faced before. We're looking at legalization of marijuana in 33 states, and drug overdose is now the #1 cause of death in people under the age of 50 in America. It's the #1 accidental cause of death in America, and it's been there since 2014. So we have to realize that things have changed. Things are not where they were even 5 years ago, let alone 10 or 20 years ago when some of us were in school. So how does this affect us, and how did we get to this point? Because if we have any hope of being able to solve these problems going forward, we need to understand how we got here. And I love history. I'm a huge history buff. And so we look at some different points of what our society has been through, and one of them is advertisements. So you can't turn on the television without seeing some advertisement for a pharmaceutical drug. And it always cracks me up because it's the first 15 seconds that tells you why you should take the drug, and then the remainder of the 45 seconds of why you should not take that drug because of all the different side effects. But the advertisements started in 1997 when the FDA decided that they were going to allow pharmaceutical companies to directly advertise to us, the consumer. And this has started an entire wave of medication use. I mean, in 1997, when one of the first huge marketing campaigns that hit was the little blue pill, right? Everybody knows the little blue pill, Viagra. It was a huge marketing campaign. They showed advertisements of happy couples frolicking in a garden. They were maybe on a yacht someplace. I'm fairly certain that my mother was convinced she had erectile dysfunction for about 5 years. She might still, I don't know, we don't talk about it. The point is, though, is that these advertisements are very, very convincing, and they make us think that maybe we have some problems that we don't have. As an example, if any of you in here, and I'm looking at you, of course, want longer eyelashes, for example, okay? You can go to your doctor and you can request a prescription that's called Latisse. Latisse is a pharmaceutical grade. You put it on your eyelashes, and in about 6 to 8 weeks, you will have longer, fuller eyelashes. It's going to be beautiful. You might go blind. That is one of the side effects. I mean, really, you're worth it. So, good thing you don't need to put on mascara because you won't be able to see to do that. Either way, it's a multi-million-dollar pharmaceutical drug. So people are willing to take that risk. Why? Because the advertisements, they feature Brooke Shields sometimes, someone who's been known for beauty in our society, and we want to be beautiful. We want to be beautiful people. But what has this done? Well, it's allowed societal changes to take place. In other words, we are raising entire generations right now with the ideology that there is a pill for everything. You need to wake up? I got a pill for that. Oh, you need to go to sleep? No problem. We got pills for that too. You need to focus on a test? I got you. Whatever it happens to be, we have a pill for that. Like we used to say there's an app for that. Nope, now there's a pill for that. And then people start talking about it on social media. Insta, Snap, whatever it happens to be, Facebook. They start talking about how they aced a test because of Adderall. They went to their doctor and they got a prescription for Xanax to help them with some of their anxiety before a big track meet. Right? We're hearing these things and it's becoming normalized for us. There was a time in history you didn't hear the word overdose. And if you did, it was far, far away. We didn't go to the doctor for every possible symptom that we had. And we certainly didn't get a prescription, but that's not how things are anymore. Now we look at things like information, right? Most of us are carrying around a computer with us at all times. I'm talking about cell phones. We have access to more information today than we ever had in history's time. And what are we doing with that information? Well, one of the things is symptom checker. Now, by a show of hands, and you guys can do one of these so nobody sees. How many of you have ever gone online and Googled your symptoms? And how many of you should be dead? Okay, so that's what happens. That's what happens. Because I work with about 4 different physicians, and our medical director, I got her a coffee cup, and it said, "Please do not confuse your Google search with my medical degree." But that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. So we put into the symptom checker, like I've got a headache, I'm nauseous, I'm tired, and it'll come back like, you've got malaria from southeastern Africa. There's been 10 cases reported. Somehow in northeast Ohio, that's what you've got. And now we're heading to the emergency room to get treated for a disease that we don't really even have. You see, the problem, though, when we have this information, we begin to self-diagnose. And when we begin to self-diagnose, well, then we self-medicate. And when we self-medicate, well, overdose deaths take the number 1 spot, and we legalize a Schedule I drug in 33 states. And that's where we are today. 10 years ago, if I would have asked to approach the staff or the school community about legalization of marijuana, I probably would have been laughed out of the room, probably been called a hippie on my way out. But that's reality now. It went live here in Ohio in January of this year. So how does it affect our communities? How is it affecting our schools? So let's talk about that. But you see, I want to talk about the opioid epidemic. I want to talk about how our apathy towards drug use has changed. In order to do that, we have to look at this, because what this is telling us is that when we are talking about drugs in the community, we can no longer overlook prescription drug abuse. Right up there, we have marijuana as number 1. That really shouldn't surprise anybody. But look at number 2. It's prescription medication. Prescription medication is the second most abused drug in America. So we really have to open up our eyes to where this problem's coming from and how we got to this problem. So when we talk about prescription drugs, let's look at some information here. All right, so the number of prescriptions filled for American adults and children rose 85% between 1997 and 2016. 85%, that's a lot. But it's even more so when you look at the fact that our population only grew 21% during that same time period. We're prescribing more. We're taking more medication. And if you're not taking all of your medication, or a parent is not taking all of their medication, they're putting it up and maybe in the cupboard in case they need it another time. Think about Vicodin. Think about going to the dentist and getting 60 Vicodin for a root canal. Maybe you take 2 of them, right? So then what do you do with the bottle? Put it in your medicine cabinet? Until what, one of your children's friends come over and find it? Till one of your children find it? This is where we're at, and this has happened on a scale of, in 2012, there were 259 million prescriptions filled for opiates in America. That's enough for every single adult to have their very own bottle of pills. So again, we have to look at the formation of this problem in order to really kind of wrap our heads around it and figure out what we're going to do about it for the future. So when we talk about these prescription medications, as we mentioned with Latisse, you could go blind. But I'm going to show you a list of, these are all FDA-approved side effects for medication that is currently on the market right now. So we have some drowsiness or difficulty waking up in the morning. That's pretty standard for me. That's why Starbucks is such a hit. Maybe some burning or tingling in the hands, arm, feet, or legs. That's a little bit more serious. Might want to look at that. Headache. Dizziness, weight gain, I don't need any help there either. Cold-like symptoms such as a runny nose or a cough. So if you're taking a prescription medication and it starts giving you cold-like symptoms, what are you going to do? Probably start taking another medication, aren't you? And so now we're starting to mix prescription drugs with over-the-counter medications. We don't always think about that, do we? We're just trying to alleviate the symptoms that maybe another drug has given us. We also look at nausea or vomiting, maybe some stomach cramps. Even ibuprofen can cause stomach cramps if you need to eat with it. We have nervousness, anxiety, irritability, or mood swings. Think about students who are on medication. Think about these side effects. These are all, again, FDA-approved side effects in medications. And this is what you're hearing in that really, really fast talk at the end of a prescription. It's like cold-like symptoms such as runny nose, nausea, vomiting, stomach cramps. You can't possibly understand what they're saying, but this is what it is. We also have shakiness or tremors, flushing of the skin, abnormal thoughts or behavior such as aggression, confusion, hallucinations, severe depression, or suicidal thoughts. Okay, things are getting a little bit more serious. Memory loss, mental slowing, or problems with attention or memory. Oh my. Sleepwalking activities. There's a drug out there right now, and it features a golden butterfly that just will help carry you off to sleep, to slumber. And then it comes on and it says, well, you may easily drive a vehicle without any knowledge of doing so. How'd you end up here? I have no idea. Sleepwalking activities, so sleep driving activities is also going to be happening. I mean, so here's the thing. I don't know what I would have wrong with me where taking a drug that does that would be like, sure, let me buy a ticket for that. Pretty sure I'll just deal with what I've got because that could be a problem. And then, of course, death. So in 0.2% of the studies that were completed for that sleep aid I just spoke about, death occurred. Please let your physician know if any of those side effects happen. I mean, let's think about things. Like that really did get out of hand fast, didn't it? Because we're not talking about just headaches. We're not talking about just tremors. We're talking about maybe 5 or 6 of those symptoms being present just because you started taking one prescription medication, maybe 2. I want you to think about the last time you got a prescription from your physician and you went to the pharmacy and you had it filled. They always ask you the same thing, don't they? Do you have any questions for the pharmacist? And most of us are like, no, I gotta go. I don't have time for that. I'll read that 3-page booklet that you put on my script. No, you won't. We both know that's not going to happen. So when do we ask these questions to our doctors? When do we ask these questions to our pharmacist? When do we know to even ask these questions? Have you asked your doctor if any of the medications you're on are habit forming? Have you asked your doctors if you could just stop taking it? Have you asked your doctor if maybe 2 other symptoms that are currently being treated are due to that medication? The common answer to those questions is no. We're all very busy people. We have a life to live. We have things to take care of. First of all, the symptoms that we're getting treated are slowing us down to begin with. So when it comes time to take medication for it, we just want it over and done with so we can get back to our lives. But that mentality, it's caused problems. It's caused problems to understanding that we have an increased acceptance of medications to fix our problems. The belief that we're only ever going to improve with medication. So I want you to think, what if you did wake up with headaches? What if you did wake up and you were very lethargic and you couldn't concentrate very well and you were tired and your muscles hurt and your joints hurt and it got to the point where it was just difficult for you to get around? Maybe you would make a doctor's appointment and maybe you'd go and you'd pay your copay and you'd sit and you'd wait your 45 minutes for their 5 minutes with your doctor. And if you go in there and you sit and the doctor comes in and says, oh, goodness, you just need to drink more water and get outside a little bit more. Are you going to say, okay, thanks? No, you're going to be like, I want my copay back. That's ridiculous. But if the doctor wrote you out a prescription, chances are you're going to feel better on your way to the pharmacy. Because we rate our doctors on the competency of their knowledge of medication, not their knowledge of medicine. There's a difference. So we look at the fact that $200 billion per year is spent in the U.S. on unnecessary and improper use of medication for the drugs themselves and related medical costs. The reason I started this presentation out with this information is because you have to understand that you're going to be dealing with teenagers, with coworkers, with colleagues, with friends who have the notion that taking a pill is no big deal. And then when we take an herbal supplement, that's no big deal either. When the fact is, this is a huge deal, and it's perpetuated a drug culture that has caused a lot of problems. What kind of problems? Well, when we look at prescription problems, we're also looking at the direct linkage to addiction problems. And this is how we got to where we are today. So we know that when we look at the opioid epidemic as an example, a lot of people have opinions about opiate addicts. Bless you, by the way. A lot of people have opinions about how this all got started and the problem with it. But here's the thing. You see, opiates aren't new. As a matter of fact, China was fighting the opium wars in the late 1800s. In 1916, a drug was created in Germany called oxycodone. Oxycodone is a synthetic opiate. It was actually brought to our country in 1939. I'm telling you those dates because I want to reinforce to all of you, not new. But what did happen was in 1996, a company by the name of Purdue Pharmaceuticals got a hold of oxycodone and they reformulated it. They took that reformulation and they went to the FDA and they said, hey guys, guess what? We have made oxycodone so it is no longer habit forming, no more addiction. They showed some very pretty graphs to the FDA. And the FDA said, oh, great, that's awesome. Purdue Pharmaceuticals was worth $48 million in 1996. Pretty good sized company. But 4 years later, in the year 2000, that same company was worth $1.1 billion. And it was based on the marketing of its chief drug, Oxycontin. 2004, the first lawsuit hit because we found out that the graphs that it showed the FDA were the wrong graphs. It gave them the wrong information. And this is why March of this year, Purdue Pharmaceuticals was ordered to pay out over $200 million to the state of Oklahoma for its direct linkage to the opiate epidemic. And that was one state. We're going to be seeing more of that, but we have to understand why this started. It wasn't like 12 years ago, everyone just decided, hey, today's going to be the day I try heroin. That's not how it works. But 170,000 people did pick up heroin for the first time last year. So again, we have to look at what we're dealing with so we know how to better combat ourselves. Please remember that in America right now, you have a greater chance of dying from a drug overdose than you do a car accident. This is why we're talking about this. This is why we've brought this to schools, because it starts someplace. So just to kind of drive this point home, I want to make sure everybody in this room is on the same page. So opioid-related fatalities outnumbered gun-related deaths. So I want you guys to think about the times that we hear about gun-related deaths and gun violence. It is horrible. I am a mother. I am a wife. It's scary. It makes me want to cry. I can't deal with it sometimes. I can't even look at the news. But what happens when we hear about gun violence? We all start maybe debating the Second Amendment rights. Maybe our congressmen begin to talk about what should be allowed, what shouldn't be allowed. We have people who are talking about mental health. We have conversation about it, right? But again, the people who've died from a drug overdose outnumber gun-related deaths in America on a scale of 3 to 1. And no one's talking about it. We also have to realize that the death rate now is 5 times higher than it was in 1999. Let me reassure you, that has never happened before. Never. Not with HIV, not with AIDS, not with anything. We have never had an increase of that significance happen in our culture before. More than 70,000 people in the U.S. have died from drug overdose in 2017. So there's 200 families today that are going to get a phone call that they don't want to get. And there's going to be another 200 tomorrow, and another 200 the day after that. This is a problem, and it's a problem we have to work together about. 2017 marked the 3rd year in a row that America has experienced a decline in its life expectancy rates. We're supposed to be the greatest country in the world, and our life expectancy rates are on a decline. So it means that drug overdoses in 2017 killed more people than guns, than car crashes, or HIV/AIDS ever killed in a single year in the United States. All right, as with 2016, because the numbers continue to rise, all right, we still haven't got a hold of this yet, but the 2017 death toll is higher than if you took all of the U.S. military casualties from the Vietnam War and you added them to the casualties of the Iraq wars, you combine them together, you're still not touching what we lose in 1 year to drug overdose. That's how significant this problem is. And we take those things very seriously. Not only am I a representative from on-demand drug testing, but I'm a licensed counselor. And I work with a population of individuals who are battling addiction, whether it's alcoholism, heroin addiction, cocaine, crack, whatever it happens to be. That's the population I chose to work with. And I can assure you that not a single person that comes into our office ever chose addiction. But we have to kind of start understanding the severity of the problem we're talking about. We can no longer just say, well, it doesn't affect me. I'm not having to deal with this. That was their choice, not mine. I don't want to deal with it. This is why. It's affecting our community. It's affecting our country. It's affecting our schools. So what would be the reaction if we were struck by 21 terrorist attacks on the scale of 9/11 every single year? Think about that. 21. That's what the opioid epidemic is taking on our country. People don't just start using when they hit 18 years old. The idea behind this, the idea of using a pill to protect ourselves, to solve our problems, that starts much earlier in age. So remember that, there we go. 1 in 4 people prescribed opioids will become addicted. Oxycontin, oxycodone, and now Percocet is approved for use in children as young as 12 years old. One of my clients blew a kneecap out during a high school football game his junior year in high school. He was a wonderful, wonderful student from the area. So he went to the doctor's office, and they put him on oxy. His knee wasn't quite healing as well as they thought. So even by the beginning of the next football season, which was his senior year, he was still in some pain. He wasn't sure he could play. Well, his parents didn't want him to lose out on his scholarship. So they increased the amount of oxy he was taking. He was getting prescribed 180 of them a month. A month. That's not really uncommon. It is when you're 17 years old. He got a scholarship and he started to play for YSU. It was his sophomore year of YSU when he ended up going to heroin because he couldn't get his pills anymore. By the end of his sophomore year, he was kicked off the team and he was kicked out of campus. And then his parents said, well, you can't come home. I don't want any addicts in my house. Became homeless. He came to our facility when he was 24 years old. Been living on the streets. He was living in the Mission when he came to our facility. Now I ask people, what choice did he have? Like I said, it's not something that's just affecting us 2 communities away. It's everywhere. And we have to become knowledgeable about it. We have to realize that a psychological addiction can set in with us 2 days when taking a strong opioid. It can take as little as 2 weeks to begin a physical addiction to opiate taken as prescribed. So in other words, when you stop taking it, you're going to feel it. And then 82% right now in America of people who are battling an opiate addiction, they started with prescription pain medication. So I understand how the media is. I understand how the news is. I do. I see that. I remember easily the vivid images of the people who were passed out in the front of the car. You know, the kid in the back seat crying. Like I said, I'm a mom. It made me angry. I remember seeing the mother who was overdosed in the toy aisle as her daughter was looking at dolls. Yeah, I saw all those things, and they all gave me a reaction, very visceral reaction. But then I remember, where did this problem start from? 82% started with a prescription medication. So again, prescription medications are now the most commonly abused drugs among 12 to 13-year-olds, guys. Pain medications are going to be like your Vicodin, your Oxycontin, Percocet, Demerol, Darvon. Emergency department visits related to prescription painkiller abuse has more than doubled in recent years. Death by overdose is a large risk with many of these drugs. So what happens is it suppresses our breathing. It fails our respiratory system. And then again, physical tolerance develops quickly with these painkillers, causing physical dependence and withdrawal side effects, something like nausea, vomiting, constipation, even itching of the skin. I had one client who was so uncomfortable she wanted to rip her skin off of her body. So these are very, very serious situations that occur, but if we have children who think that the pills that come from the doctor or the little orange bottle are safe, then we're doing a disservice to our children. So one of the biggest problems that we have is, of course, overdose. But right now, in 2018 and the beginning of 2019, the most deadly drug in America is fentanyl. It surpasses heroin, cocaine, all of them, fentanyl. Now, I want you to look at this. I want you to look at morphine, okay? About the size of a pea is enough to kill you. As you move on down the line, we look at heroin, which is 2 times as effective as morphine. We're looking at the size of a sunflower seed. That's it. Enough to kill you. Fentanyl is 100 times more potent than morphine. And all you need there is about a sesame seed. That's not very much. But then when you look at sufentanil and carfentanil, a grain of sand and a half a grain of salt. It's all it takes to kill somebody. Let's see here. We're going to pause for dramatic effect. It's not that my clicker's not working. Oh, there we go. So we're good. Thank you. Although I appreciate the quick reaction. So all of this has led to a perfect storm, hasn't it? Because if I'm going to sit up here and for 15, 20 minutes talk to you about the dangers of prescription medication, what does that mean? Oh, well, we must find an herbal supplement to take its place. All right, I've got something for you guys. All natural cure-all. All right, you got PTSD, we got you cured. You got arthritis, I got you cured. Whatever you need, right here. This is the cure. This is how it's being advertised in America right now. And here's the thing. People will say to me, well, you're a licensed chemical dependency counselor, so therefore you must be anti-marijuana. And I say, no, I'm not anti-marijuana. And they say, oh my gosh, are you pro-marijuana? I say, no, I'm not pro-marijuana either. You see, marijuana is a drug, plain and simple, and it needs to be treated like a drug. So when we talk about marijuana, understand that it did go legal here in the state of Ohio as medicinal purposes in January of 2019. Adults and minors, there is no age limit on Ohio's medical marijuana program. Technically, a 5-year-old could get a medical card from a physician. These are going to be all of the different types of scenarios or conditions. As I mentioned, it is a cure-all, so it will help all of these. Can you think of another single drug, either prescription or over-the-counter, that claims to do as much as this? Nope. So when we look at marijuana, smoking will not be allowed, but what we do see that is going to be allowed for medical marijuana, I think we need some batteries, is going to be like tinctures. We're going to also have, there it is, oils, plant material, edibles, patches. The law, as I mentioned, does prohibit the use of medical marijuana by smoking or combustion, but it does allow for vaporization. Vaping. You guys all know what vaping is, right? I mean, all the cool kids are doing it. This is what it looks like. Sometimes it's got a fruity smell. A lot of times it'll have nicotine in it, but guess what? It also has liquid marijuana. Are you going to be able to tell the difference? Most people can't. One of the earliest telltale signs is the consistency of liquid marijuana resembles kind of an oil, and nicotine is a little bit more of a watery substance. That's about the only way to look at it and tell the difference. A lot of times when we talked about marijuana, we talked about the pungent odor of marijuana has always been kind of a telltale sign. Well, that's gone. Because if someone's vaping it, you can get it in a variety of flavors. We can go with watermelon candy, tropical haze, Gorilla Glue. I don't know. If you're feeling fancy, we got some pink champagne up there for you. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. They have Fruity Pebbles flavored. They have Captain Crunch, Lucky Charms. But yes, again, let me just reiterate to everybody, the law does prohibit any form that is attractive to children. Any form attracted to children. Now, I don't know how many of you in here actually have children. I have 2 sons, and I'm just going to be honest with all of you. Either one of my children will cut you for a gummy bear. Not even going to feel bad about it tomorrow. They're going to want that candy. So when we start talking about this, please remember that we are looking at forms and foods, candies, and a lot of times you're not going to be able to tell the difference between the two. So when we talk about marijuana, a lot of times I get back, well, it's just a little pot. What's the big deal? First of all, 1 joint today is the equivalent of 17 and a half joints of 1975. So please know we are not talking about the same stuff from 20 years ago. We're talking about THC content 20 years ago going anywhere from 1 to 2%. Good stuff was 6 to 7%. Some government hybrids right now are going over 71% THC. So ask yourselves, if people were getting high on 2%, what do you think 70% is doing to people? So remember, we're not talking about the same stuff. All right, so we know that marijuana changes the brain's chemistry. It inhibits the function of neurotransmitters. You lose short-term memory and coordination becomes impaired. Habitual use affects the overall ability to learn. So I think we're starting to see a pattern here of how this could affect our schools. And then long-term use is indicative of depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, or schizophrenia. So we're seeing an increase problems with marijuana. And unfortunately, when it comes to marijuana, we don't have a whole lot of information. What we do know, though, is that marijuana use in teens has demonstrated a loss of up to 8 IQ points by the time they're 25. And those are points that they're never going to get back. We also know that it is addictive. A lot of people will say marijuana is not addictive. Well, yes, it is. Actually, 1 in 6 people who start using as a teen will become addicted to marijuana. We also know that marijuana and teen driving do not mix. It is the most common illegal drug found in drivers who die in accidents. About 14%, and sometimes it is combined with other drugs. It is the most common drug among teens. It's also the most common drug among adults. And marijuana use may precede depression. So we also, again, are going to be seeing increased suicidal thoughts and depression in teens who use marijuana. Moving forward, maybe moving forward. There we go. So this is actually a survey that was done in our area. If you can see, this is coming from the Coalition for a Drug-Free Mahoning County. And they looked at juniors in area schools, and what they found is that 22% have consumed alcohol, 15% have used marijuana, 3% have used heroin, 4% have misused a prescription medication, and 28% have used an e-cigarette or have vaped. Now, we also asked them, what do you plan to do in the next 30 days? We have 21% to consume alcohol, almost 15% to marijuana. We have almost 3% again that intend to use heroin in the next 30 days. And then 5% will be misusing a prescription. What really scares me beyond the heroin use in our schools is that 46.8% believe that marijuana does not cause harm. That scares me because it does cause harm. And unfortunately, that message is not being given to our youth. So we have to realize again how critical everyone's role is that's in this room. Has anyone heard of CBD oil? Yeah, it's another one that all the cool kids are using. So CBD oil is something that you can rub on your skin. You can use it under your tongue. You can eat it as a sugar-coated gummy. A lot of different ways. There's some evidence, some of it's scientific, but a lot of it is subjective, that it does help with some of these disorders. It was legalized here in Ohio about 3 or 4 weeks ago, under Senate Bill 57. The law says that it has to have less than 0.3% THC. The number one problem, though, that we have with CBD oil is that the packaging may claim to be THC-free or below traceable amounts, but they actually do contain enough to fail a drug screen. So the problem with CBD is that there's no one regulating the industry. So we don't really know what's going to be in that bottle that we bring home. But we did have some FDA approval use for CBD as an anti-seizure drug, but this is going to be pharmaceutical grade, and it's not something that you're going to find on the streets or at a gas station. And so when we move forward, when we talk about all of these different types of drugs, we're going to talk about some signs and some symptoms that we're going to all look for in our youth. Okay, so we want to look at poor academic performance, missing school or extracurricular activities, getting into conflicts or trouble at school. I was working with these 14-year-old twins, actually, at the beginning of the year. They had used some marijuana, and so I had been speaking with them about this. And this is exactly how their parents knew something was wrong. They quit their sport activities, and then they started to get in trouble at school. So these are extremely important telltale signs. If they become defiant, uncooperative, hostile, increased illegal activity or increased behavior, decreased interest in activities or hobbies, if they start changing their friends, if they start changing their social circles, isolating themselves from friends or from family, acting secretive, more so than a normal teenager, newfound demand for privacy. Again, the key word on that one is demand. So it's almost to the point of a panic type of situation instead of just a get out of my room. It could manifest itself into where it looks almost like a panic. Lack of respect for authority, avoiding eye contact, complaints from teachers, so that's why it's important everyone here pays attention, classmates, or et cetera. Unexplained disappearances for significant periods of time. So we really have to look at an overall or a comprehensive look at our students and of our friends and our colleagues, because it's not going to be maybe just one of these, but it may be a series of different behaviors that are altered from their normal stance. So when we look at signs and symptoms, and I do have the PDF available for anybody who wants this, but marijuana, they're going to have slowed reaction, judgment errors, isolation. As you can see, there's quite a few here. For cocaine, we're also going to be looking at reduced or erratic productivity, decreased impulse controls, unnatural weight loss, increased energy, bloodshot eyes. Those are going to be the common signs and symptoms of those drugs. Moving on, we're going to look at amphetamines and methamphetamines. Amphetamines are going to be like your Adderall, your Ritalin, your phentermine. And PCP is a hallucinogenic drug. It's also known as angel dust. And it actually works because it expands the brain until it begins to start pressing on the skull. And then you see things. So keep those things in mind when you're seeing any of these types of signs or symptoms being shown up. Please make sure you address them. Opioids are going to be consistent fatigue, lethargy, lowered motivation, extreme sweating. A lot of times if you are dealing with someone who has a true opiate addiction, you will notice when they don't have something because of those withdrawal symptoms that'll set in. And again, it'll be panicked. Okay, so can you find the drugs in this next? There we go. Pretty standard thing. I want you guys to look at that for just a moment. Maybe you walk in, you see this. So where do we think we're going to find the drugs? Well, let's look. So actually all of these places are going to hold drugs and have held drugs. So the Glade can is actually a false bottom can, but it looks just like a real thing. We have a flameless candle in the background. As you can see, because of the height, it's not just for decorative purposes. Actually, it does hold substances. We have books on the bottom that have areas cut out in those books. Also, the Xbox over on the side, that gray panel actually pops off, and there was drugs inside of it. So as you can see, even inside of the flip-flops, which are on the bottom, there was a portion that was cut out of the styrofoam sole where they could put drugs. No one was ever the wiser. So where do you think people would hide drugs? Well, look at that. That's in the bottom of a sweatshirt. In a baseball cap. They sell belts that you can stash things in. Like I said, it's a scary world we're in. Look at that. That's an Xbox controller. The batteries in this Xbox controller aren't batteries at all. They're actually cylinders that can hold pills if you unscrew the top. There are plenty of websites that are devoted to selling this type of, contraband. There's one that's called the Paraphernalia Boutique. And as you can see here, there's little secret pockets that are held up in the brim. This one here is called a stash pocket. It's a brand name. You can buy that. They look just like any other hat that you would have. Here we see the difference between Swedish Fish you can buy at Walmart and Edipure, which is lace. Can you guys tell the difference? Which one's which? You think a 10-year-old's going to tell the difference? You think a 15-year-old's going to tell the difference? Think a 5-year-old's going to tell the difference? No. So here's one of the things when I work with the population that I work with. They are, and they work towards recovery. They are absolutely ecstatic when they can provide information for other individuals to help curb abuse. So we look at foil. So users who freebase illicit drugs will often have napkin-sized pieces of aluminum foil in their possession. More often than not, the foil will be charred from the flame of a lighter. And yeah, this is stuff that's found in high schools. I had one mother who came and talked to me after one of my presentations, and she had said that her daughter had gotten into a pill problem shortly after high school. It had started while in high school, but it escalated. And one of the things that she had found were pieces of tape that were around her daughter's bedroom, and she had no idea what that meant. And she never really thought much of it until her daughter overdosed. She went into recovery, this girl that I'm speaking of, and she got clean. She was actually able to start school at 19 years old, college. She was very successful for 3 years, and then she came home and she told her mom that she broke up with her boyfriend. And her mom tried to console her, like we all would, and said, "It's okay, honey, no problem." And her daughter said, "You know what, Mom? You're right. It is going to be okay. I'm going to go out with my friends tonight, and we're going to have a good time." Well, she knew how to cope with problems, unfortunately. And they found her body at 3 a.m. the following morning. Her friends had left her at a park and did not call 911 because they didn't want to get into trouble. So her mother said to me, "I thought that she was cured." Well, there's no cure for that. Unfortunately, we can only be knowledgeable about what we're looking at here. So we're also going to be looking at cards, straws, and mirrors, powdered substances, credit cards, gift cards, other types of cards. Please know, too, that heroin is white powdered. Okay, it's not just the black tar stuff that they show on television. You won't really be able to tell the difference between that and maybe cocaine or PCP. It's used to chop drugs and mirrors or other reflective surfaces on which the drugs can be prepared for consumption, and then straws that are used to inhale the drugs through the nostrils. So, let me go back. This is actually one of my clients. This is information directly from her. She said look for things like pill grinders, spoons, metal caps from bottles, straws, toilet paper, paper towel tubes, foil, glass tubes. I mean, as you can see, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. Lighters, candles. She said lighters were huge, like 10, 12 lighters. No student should ever have that many lighters on them. But if they're freebasing, they're going to go through a lighter every time they use because of the amount of heat they need. Brillo-type shaving, scissors, Band-Aids. Also a bit of advice, look for straws that are not only cut, but at least a quarter of the straw bent because they can store drugs in those. She started at the age of 14. So when we look at the reasons why adults use drugs, we also want to compare that to the reason why kids use drugs. So other people, again, peer pressure still number one, but it's not just from their peers. All right, they're also looking at their friends' parents for this. We also look at popular media, music, movies. They all perpetuate this drug culture. Escape and self-medication. So sometimes we have an increase of those mental disorders. They find that a substance makes them feel good for the first time. So they're going to continue to use for that feeling. Maybe they're bored. Maybe they want to be a rebel. Maybe they're just looking for that instant gratification. Lack of confidence. And sometimes, like with marijuana, it's a lot of misinformation. So we realize that when we talk about drug culture, when we started this conversation, we started talking about why perpetuating a drug culture and pills and apathy because of use will just perpetuate further use. Well, we also have to look at this. You can go buy one of these. All right, these were actually sold at Target. They've since pulled them from their shelves, but for a long time you could buy these at Target. And as you can see, they're pens that look like syringes. This is a T-shirt. It looks like maybe it's just maybe a grape Kool-Aid in the state of Texas. Well, actually what this is a popular recreational drug combining cough syrup and promethazine and soda. It is definitely enough to get somebody high or dangerously intoxicated. Here's some more of those types of pens. This was from Urban Outfitters. These here are shot glasses that are shaped to look like prescription medication bottles. So we have the Italian designer Moschino for some more lovely use of pills for their fashion industry, I guess. And then here we go. That looks like a bottle of pills, right? It's not. It's a phone case. We also have, this looks like some pills that you might get at the pharmacy, but in fact, it's a purse. And then if you want to bring the whole outfit together, there we go, Homecoming 2019. So it's easy to become and think that all hope is lost, right? When we think about all of the different problems that are plaguing our society, that are plaguing our kids, plaguing our colleagues and our friends. But the fact of the matter is that that's not, hope is not lost. By talking to your students regularly about the dangers of drugs and alcohol, you're actually going to be able to reduce their chances of using them by 42%. Make sure that you're looking for those warning signs of drug use, including depression, falling grades, isolation, changing in friends. Find help if you suspect your child or a student is on drugs. Look for changes in patterns of behavior, mood changes, hygiene, even with who they're associating with and where they're spending their time. Don't be afraid to discuss a potential problem. Remember to be supportive and honest. A friend of mine had 2 stepsons that lived out of the state, and they would come in maybe once a month to stay with them. One of the sons was 17 years old. He was a senior in high school, and he came into town for the Canfield Fair. This was 2 years ago. So they were going to go out and have a good family day at the Canfield Fair. While they were at the fair, her stepson was on the phone, like teenagers are, and said, "Hey, I have to go to the grandstand real quick." "Why do you have to go to the grandstand?" And he's like, "Oh, one of my old friends is over there. I haven't seen him in a while." No, he completely did a drug deal online and went over and picked up the drugs. He transferred the money through an online account. That's modern age drug dealing right there. And so that's happening. We have to be aware of that. We have to pay attention to the world around us there. Make sure that you talk to your loved ones, people that you care about drugs. When you talk to somebody about this, when you have to approach a student or a family member, please make sure that you're going to listen. You want to encourage that conversation. You want to talk to them. You want to ask them a lot of open-ended questions, like, how do you feel about this? Not a whole lot of yes and no. Even though it might be terrifying, we want to keep our emotions in check when we're having these conversations. We want to make sure that we're involved in what's happening. We're not just waiting to get out of here. We're not just waiting to get home, that we are actually paying attention to the world around us. We want to make sure that expectations, limits, and consequences have all been enforced. We want to make sure that we're honest, that we're open. Kids from the ages of 5 on up know exactly when somebody's lying, and we sometimes take that for granted. We also want to be positive. People do recover. A lot of times when we deal with students, when they find out the dangers of drug use, they will stop using, but a lot of times they just don't have access to that information. And if you're dealing with somebody in your family, talk about their history, and then you can role play ways of saying no. So what else can we do? Properly dispose of unused medication. So one of the reasons that the opiate epidemic got so far out of control is because people were being prescribed 180 a month or 60 pills for a tooth pull, and then they were only using a handful, if that, maybe 5 or less of those pills. Those pills would then end up in someone's medicine cabinet. There's parties out there where in order to get in, you have to bring some type of medication. They won't let you in the door without it. So even if you have a student who's a pretty good kid, but they want to be part of that cool crowd, they're going to grab a handful of those pills just to get in the door. They may not use them, but we've just put into circulation maybe 100 oxys. So we have to make sure if you're not using your medication usually expires 6 months to 12 months after it's prescribed. Make sure you check with your pharmacist or your physician. And when you do have some medication that you need to get rid of, make sure you're disposing of it properly. All right, unused or expired prescription medications are a public safety issue. They often lead to potential accidental poisoning, misuse, and overdose. So a lot of times people say, "Can I just flush the medicine down the sink or the toilet?" Well, some communities may prohibit this practice, so you want to make sure that you check with your village offices or your township offices to find out, because it could leave trace levels of the drug in rivers, lakes, and drinking water supplies. So don't flush medications down the sink or toilet unless the prescription drug labeling or patient information that accompany the medicine specifically instructs you to do so. Make sure you're also compliant with your community's laws and regulations prior to taking such actions. So these are some simple steps to dispose of medicines in the household trash. You're going to mix medicines. Don't crush them, because sometimes just handling certain medications are a problem. Such as dirt, cat litter, or even used coffee grounds. You're going to place the mixture in a container, such as a sealed plastic bag. You're going to throw them into the garbage and scratch out any prescriptions bottles that you're throwing out as well. You must not share your prescription drugs. They were prescribed to you. Believe it or not, I have to tell parents this more so than any other group. We cannot give medication that was prescribed to us to our children. And we cannot take our children's prescriptions ourselves. We just have to remember that our prescriptions are our prescriptions. They don't belong to anybody else. In closing, remember that in today's drug culture, facing the epidemic that's in front of us, one of the most important things you can do for your students, for yourself, for our community, is to understand the problem and offer help when it's needed. Again, we can't just continue to put this problem in the corner and hope that it goes away. We've been doing that for a decade, and look where it's gotten us. Again, #1 killer in people the age of 50. We must pay attention to one another, we must reach out when we can, and we must begin to understand what we're dealing with. This is going to be one of the main components, main reasons why student drug testing is so critical in today's times. So to answer the question that people ask me all the time, why do we need to do it? Well, because it begins a conversation. It begins a conversation you may not otherwise have. If there's 98% of the students may never test positive for anything, but they may have questions. They may say, hey, is this drug going to come up on this test? They may say, oh, at a party, I can't take that drug because it could come up on a drug screen. I better not have that drug. It begins a conversation. It's a deterrent. And as you can see, we need as much help as we can get. Everyone here today, and I'm not being overly dramatic, but everyone here today has the ability to save a life by just paying attention to one another and not being afraid to speak up when we need to. By recognizing the problem, understanding the signs and the symptoms of use. So I want to thank everybody today for letting me come in, letting me talk to you today. I don't know if we have time for questions, but I have business cards with me, so if anybody does have any questions or wants any follow-up information, please take one of my cards. First and foremost, I am a counselor, I am a therapist. So if you or anybody you know is suffering from any type of addiction, or maybe someone's recently gone due to overdose and you need some resources, please reach out. It will be a confidential conversation, and we'll get you the resources that you need. All right, guys, thank you so much for your time today.